HOA fined me for growing vegetables, and I revealed I'm chairman of the Agriculture Board. The air was thick with the scent of damp soil and blooming jasmine as I knelt in my backyard, my hands buried in the earth. My garden was my sanctuary, a patchwork of green where tomatoes hung heavy on their vines, zucchini sprawled like lazy sunbathers, and rows of carrots peeked out from the dirt like shy children. It was a labor of love, a rebellion against the sterile perfection of Karen Heights, our pristine suburban neighborhood ruled by the iron fist of the Homeowners Association. To them, my garden was a crime scene. To me, it was life itself. The trouble started 3 months ago, when a crisp, official-looking letter arrived from the HOA. Its tone was colder than a winter frost. "Dear Mr. Daniel Brooks," it began, "your unauthorized vegetable garden violates Section 4.2 of the Karen Heights Covenant, which prohibits non-ornamental plants in visible areas. You are hereby fined $500 and required to remove the garden within 14 days. I laughed at first, thinking it was a prank. Who fines someone for growing vegetables? But the follow-up letter, threatening legal action, wiped the smile off my face. Karen Heights was a place where conformity was king. Every lawn was manicured to a uniform shade of green. Every mailbox painted the same shade of eggshell white. The HOA led by the infamous Karen Whitaker, yes. Her name was actually Karen, patrolled the streets like a hawk, her clipboard a scepter of power. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of platinum blonde hair and a smile that never reached her eyes. To her, my garden was an affront to the neighborhood's aesthetic integrity. To me, she was a tyrant in capri pants. I wasn't always a rebel. 2 years ago, I moved to Karen Heights after my wife, Lily, passed away. The grief was a weight I carried everywhere, and this house, with its sterile walls and empty rooms, felt like a tomb. Gardening became my therapy. Each seed I planted was a promise to keep going, a way to nurture something when my heart felt barren. The HOA didn't care about that. They saw weeds where I saw hope. The morning after the second letter arrived, I was pruning my tomato plants when Karen herself appeared at my gate, her heels clicking on the pavement like a metronome. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I trust you've received our correspondence?" I stood, wiping dirt from my hands. "I did, Karen. And I'm keeping my garden." Her smile tightened. "The rules are clear. This isn't a farm. If you don't comply, the fines will escalate, and we'll take further action." "Further action?" I raised an eyebrow. "What? You gonna send a SWAT team for my zucchinis?" Her eyes narrowed. "Don't test me, Daniel. You're new here. You don't understand how things work." I leaned on my shovel, meeting her gaze. "I understand plenty. You think you can bully me into ripping out my garden because it doesn't match your cookie-cutter vision? Good luck." That was the moment I declared war. Not just for my garden, but for every soul in Karen Heights who'd ever been cowed by her clipboard. I wasn't just Daniel Brooks, widower and amateur gardener. I was the chairman of the State Agriculture Board, a fact I'd kept quiet since moving here. I hadn't wanted the attention, the questions, the inevitable pity when people learned about Lily. But Karen was about to learn who she was dealing with. The next week, the fines doubled, then tripled. My mailbox became a dumping ground for HOA notices, each one more threatening than the last. Neighbors whispered behind their perfectly trimmed hedges, casting nervous glances at my backyard. Some sympathized, but most were too afraid of Karen's wrath to speak up. Except for Mrs. Patel, the elderly woman next door. She was a tiny hurricane of a woman, with a sharp tongue and a penchant for sneaking me homemade samosas. "Daniel," she said one evening, leaning over the fence with a conspiratorial grin, "you're stirring up trouble, and I love it. That Karen needs to be taken down a peg." I chuckled, handing her a ripe tomato. "I'm working on it, Mrs. Patel. Got any ideas?" She winked. "Keep growing those vegetables. And maybe dig a little deeper." Her words stuck with me, though I didn't know what she meant at the time. Dig deeper. Was she talking about the garden? Or something else? Mrs. Patel had lived in Karen Heights for decades, long before it became the HOA's personal fiefdom. She knew things, secrets the rest of us didn't. The battle escalated when Karen sent a landscaper to my property without my consent. I came home to find a man in a neon vest yanking out my carrot tops. "Stop!" I shouted, sprinting across the lawn. Who the hell authorized this? The landscaper, a nervous guy named Tim, held up his hands. "Ma'am Whitaker said it was an emergency." I'm just following orders. Emergency. I snatched the carrots from his grip. These are food, not a bomb threat. Tim looked like he wanted to disappear into the mulch. Look, man, I don't make the rules. She pays me. I sent him packing, but the damage was done. Half my carrot crop was ruined, and my blood was boiling. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the latest HOA fine $2,000 now and made a decision. If Karen wanted a fight, she'd get one. But I wasn't going to play her game. I was going to rewrite the rules. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse and filed a formal complaint against the HOA for overreach. As chairman of the Agriculture Board, I knew the law better than Karen ever would. State regulations protected urban agriculture, and my garden was well within my rights. But I didn't stop there. I started digging figuratively, this time into the HOA's records, public documents, meeting minutes, anything I could get my hands on. Mrs. Patel's words echoed in my mind. Dig deeper. That's when I met Jake. He was a lanky, tattooed clerk at the courthouse, with a grin that suggested he'd seen it all. You're taking on Karen Whitaker? He asked, handing me a stack of files. Bold move, man. She's got this town wrapped around her finger. Not for long, I said, flipping through the documents. Anything juicy in here? Jake leaned in, lowering his voice. Check the financials. The HOA's been bleeding money for years, but nobody knows where it's going. Karen's cagey about it. You didn't hear that from me, though. I nodded, my pulse quickening. Jake was my unexpected ally, the twist I hadn't seen coming. He wasn't just a clerk, was a former Karen Heights resident who'd moved out after a run-in with the HOA over his motorcycle. He had no love for Karen, and his insider knowledge was gold. Back home, I pored over the files. The HOA's budget was a mess of vague line items, community enhancements, miscellaneous fees, consulting services, thousands of dollars unaccounted for, funneled into accounts with no clear purpose. Karen was either incompetent or crooked, and I was betting on the latter. I needed proof, though, and that meant getting closer to the HOA's inner circle. The opportunity came at the next community meeting, held in the sterile conference room of the Karen Heights clubhouse. Karen stood at the podium, her voice dripping with authority as she lectured about maintaining property values. I sat in the back, my garden finds burning a hole in my pocket, and waited for my moment. When she opened the floor for comments, I stood. Karen, I'd like to discuss the HOA's finances, I said, my voice steady. The room went silent. I've been reviewing the public records, and there are some discrepancies. Care to explain where $50,000 went last year under consulting services? Her face froze, but she recovered quickly. Those are standard expenses, Mr. Brooks. I assure you, everything is above board. Really? I pressed. Because I've got documents showing payments to a company that doesn't exist. Care to clarify? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen's smile was a thin, brittle thing now. This isn't the place for baseless accusations, she snapped. Next topic. But I wasn't done. I held up a copy of the state's urban agriculture law. Also, your fines against my garden are illegal. I'm the chairman of the State Agriculture Board, Karen. I know my rights, and I'm not ripping out a single plant. The room erupted. Neighbors gasped, whispered, stared. Karen's face turned the color of my ripest tomatoes. You're... what? She stammered. Chairman, I repeated, savoring the word. And I'm not just keeping my garden, I am proposing a community garden initiative for Karen Heights. Free for all residents, funded by the HOA's miscellaneous budget. The crowd roared with approval, drowning out Karen's protests. Mrs. Patel was on her feet, clapping like she was at a rock concert. Jake, who'd snuck into the meeting uninvited, gave me a thumbs up from the back. For the first time, I felt the tide turning. But Karen wasn't finished. The next day, she doubled down, sending a cease and desist letter claiming my garden was a public nuisance. She even tried to rally the neighbors against me, spreading rumors that my vegetables were attracting pests. It was desperate, and it only made me dig harder. With Jake's help, I traced the HOA's mysterious payments to a shell company owned by none other than Karen's brother-in-law, a man with a history of shady real estate deals. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed concrete evidence to bring her down. That's when Mrs. Patel came through again. Check the old community shed, she whispered one night, handing me a key. Karen keeps files there she doesn't want anyone to see. I waited until midnight, then slipped into the shed under cover of darkness. Inside, I found boxes of documents, bank statements, invoices, emails, proof that Karen had been siphoning HOA funds for years, funneling them to her brother-in-law's company for services that were never rendered. It was a gold mine, and it was all I needed to end her reign. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Neighbors packed the clubhouse, drawn by rumors of a showdown. Karen took the podium, her usual confidence fraying at the edges. I stood, holding a folder thick with evidence. "Karen," I said, my voice carrying across the room, "it's over. I've got proof you've been stealing from the HOA for years." The crowd gasped as I laid out the evidence. Bank records, emails, invoices. Karen's face went white. "This is slander," she shrieked, but the neighbors weren't buying it. They shouted questions, demanded answers. Mrs. Patel stood up, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I've lived here 40 years, and I've never seen a bigger crook than you, Karen Whitaker." The room exploded with cheers. Karen fled the podium, her heels clicking in defeat. By the end of the night, the HOA board voted to remove her as president. The fines against my garden were dropped, and the community garden initiative passed unanimously. But victory didn't feel as sweet as I'd expected. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door, written in Karen's elegant scrawl. "You think you've won, Daniel, but you've only made enemies. Watch your back." It was unsigned, but the threat was clear. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I felt a chill. Karen wasn't the type to go quietly, and I had a sinking feeling this wasn't the end. As I walked out to my garden, the morning sun casting long shadows across the rows of vegetables, I saw something that stopped me cold. My tomato plants, me pride and joy, were hacked to pieces, their red fruits scattered like blood across the soil. And there, carved into the dirt, was a single word: revenge. The sight of my ruined tomato plants hit me like a punch to the gut. The word revenge carved into the dirt wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. I stood there, shovel in hand, the morning dew soaking my shoes, and felt a rage I hadn't known since Lily's death. This wasn't just about vegetables anymore. It was personal. I called the police, but they were no help. "Vandalism's tough to prove," the officer said, scribbling in his notebook. "No cameras, no witnesses. Could have been kids." I knew better. Karen's note was burning a hole in my pocket, but without hard evidence linking her to the crime, it was just paper. I needed to be smarter than her, to outmaneuver her the way she'd tried to outmaneuver me. Mrs. Patel was waiting at the fence when I returned from the station. Her face was grim, her usual spark dimmed. "I heard what happened," she said, her voice low. "That woman's poison, Daniel. You need to be careful." "I'm not backing down," I said, kneeling to salvage what was left of my garden. "She's not getting away with this." Mrs. Patel's eyes gleamed with something like pride. "Good. But you need allies. Talk to Jake. He knows more than he lets on." Jake, the courthouse clerk with the tattoos and the grudge against Karen. I'd underestimated him, thinking he was just a helpful bystander. But Mrs. Patel's words made me wonder if he was more than Theta wildcard, maybe, with his own score to settle. I tracked him down that afternoon at a dive bar on the edge of town, where he was nursing a beer and scrolling through his phone. "Daniel," he said, grinning as I slid into the booth. "Heard about your garden. Karen's not playing nice, huh?" "She's playing dirty," I corrected, sliding her note across the table. "You know anything about this?" Jake's grin faded as he read it. "Damn, she's unhinged." He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I didn't want to get too deep into this, but I've got something you need to see." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of a document, an old HOA contract from 10 years ago, signed by Karen and her brother-in-law, Richard. It outlined a deal to sell a chunk of Karen Heights community land to a developer for a tidy profit, with the money funneled through the same shell company I'd uncovered. The deal had fallen through, but the intent was clear. Karen had been planning to bleed the neighborhood dry long before I showed up. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked, my voice tight. Jake shrugged. "I wasn't sure you'd go all in. People around here talk big, but they fold when Karen pushes back. You're different." I leaned forward, my mind racing. "If we can prove she's been planning this for years, we can bury her. Not just with the HOA, but legally." Jake nodded. "There's more where this came from, but we need to move fast. Karen's got friends in high places, cops, council members. She's not untouchable, but she's close. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of my ruined garden kept flashing in my mind, along with Karen's note and Jake's document. I was in over my head, but there was no turning back. The next morning, I called an emergency HOA meeting, using my new clout as the Agriculture Board chairman to force it through. The Community Garden Initiative was on the agenda, but my real goal was to expose Karen once and for all. The clubhouse was packed again, the air buzzing with tension. Karen was there, her face a mask of calm, but her eyes betrayed her nervous, darting like a cornered animal. I took the podium, holding up Jake's document and the financial records I'd gathered. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. Karen Whitaker has been stealing from this community for years. These documents prove she and her brother-in-law planned to sell our land for personal profit, while fining us for things as simple as growing vegetables. She's not protecting Karen Heights, exploiting it. The crowd erupted, some shouting in anger, others in disbelief. Karen shot to her feet. This is outrageous. Those documents are fabricated. You're trying to sabotage me because of your stupid garden. Then explain this, I said, holding up her note. You threatened me, Karen, and you destroyed my garden last night. Don't deny it. She froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Before she could respond, Mrs. Patel stood up, her voice cutting through the chaos. I saw her, Daniel, last night, sneaking around your backyard with a pair of shears. I've got it on my security camera. The room went silent. Karen's face crumpled, her facade shattering. You're lying, she screamed, but the crowd was turning on her. Neighbors who'd once cowered under her glare now stood, demanding answers. The board president, a nervous man named Harold, called for a vote to suspend Karen from all HOA activities pending an investigation. It passed overwhelmingly. As Karen stormed out, her heels clicking furiously, I felt a fleeting sense of triumph. But it was short-lived. That night, Jake called me, his voice urgent. Daniel, you need to get out of your house. Now. What? What? I asked, my heart pounding. I just got a tip from a buddy at the police station. Karen's brother-in-law, Richard's bad news. He's got connections to some rough people, and they're coming for you. They know you're the one who exposed them. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and the folder of evidence, and bolted out the door. As I sped away, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror, too close, too aggressive. My pulse raced as I took a sharp turn, the tires squealing. The car followed, gaining on me. I wasn't a hero in an action movie. I was a widower with a green thumb, and I was terrified. I drove to Mrs. Patel's house, the only place I could think of. She ushered me inside, her face pale but resolute. Stay here, she said, locking the door. I've called the police. Real ones, not Karen's cronies. Minutes later, the headlights pulled up outside. Two men got out, their silhouettes menacing in the streetlight. They banged on the door, shouting my name. Mrs. Patel grabbed a frying pan from the kitchen, her eyes blazing. Let them try, she muttered. But before things could escalate, sirens wailed in the distance. The men froze, then bolted back to their car and sped off. The police arrived moments later, and I handed over the folder of evidence, including Karen's note and Jake's document. It was enough to launch a full investigation into Karen and Richard's dealings. The next few weeks were a blur. Karen and her brother-in-law were arrested for embezzlement and conspiracy. The HOA was dissolved, replaced by a new board that embraced the Community Garden Initiative. My backyard became the centerpiece of Karen Heights' first community garden, with neighbors pitching in to plant and tend it. Mrs. Patel's samosas became a staple at our weekly garden meetings, and Jake, it turned out, was more than a clerk, was a former investigative journalist who'd been quietly building a case against Karen for years. He'd moved back to Karen Heights under the radar, waiting for the right moment to strike. I'd been his catalyst, his unexpected partner in justice. But the victory came at a cost. The night of the chase left me shaken, and the memory of my ruined garden lingered like a scar. I'd won, but I'd also lost something, my sense of safety, my belief that a place like Karen Heights could ever be home. I thought of Lily, how she'd loved gardening with me, her laughter echoing through our old backyard. This fight had been for her, in a way, but it had left me hollow. One evening, as I sat in the community garden, watching kids plant sunflower seeds under Mrs. Patel's watchful eye, I found a small envelope tucked under a tomato plant. Inside was a single sentence, written in Karen's handwriting. "You'll never be free of me." She was in jail, awaiting trial, but her words chilled me. Had she planned something else? Was this just a final taunt? I didn't know, and that uncertainty was a weight I'd carry forever. The garden flourished, a symbol of resilience and community. But as I looked at the vibrant rows of vegetables, I couldn't shake the bitterness in my heart. I'd fought for what was right, exposed corruption, and built something beautiful. Yet Karen's shadow lingered, a reminder that some battles never truly end. The cost of justice was steep, and I'd paid it in full. As I stood, brushing dirt from my hands, I realized the true twist wasn't Jake's past or Karen's crimes. It was me. I'd come to Karen Heights a broken man, seeking solace in soil. Now, I was a leader, a fighter, but also a target. The garden was my legacy, but it was also my Berdina bittersweet monument to a war I hadn't meant to wage. What do you think? Was Daniel right to take on the HOA knowing the risks? Or should he have let it go to protect his peace? Share your thoughts on who was right, who was wrong, and what you'd have done in his place.